You are listening to Cemetery Confessions, the world's #1 goth talk podcast.
Hello and welcome back to Cemetery Confessions, the Goth Talk podcast, the show where we bring on a new guest each episode to talk about socio-cultural issues pertaining to the music, the culture, the fashion, and the community that we love so much. On this episode, we are speaking with Daphne, who is an activist, a model, a Native American, among many other things. And we're going to be speaking about those issues. We're also going to be talking specifically about cultural appropriation, what that is, what it looks like, how that has impacted specifically in the United States, Indigenous tribes and their cultures and their practices, and how those systems of oppression continue today, even into goth culture and other alternative communities. So let's get right into the discussion. Daphne, please introduce yourself.
Goths hopa sharatyu mease kukukunak mease yakhana sata shranaya wakamits al yakhana satna waisiro al shawatana. What's up, guys? I'm Daphne.
Great. Welcome to the show.
What's up?
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. I'm super stoked. I'm kind of nervous, but I'm excited. I've never done this before, so.
You know what? I've done this for 5 years and I still get nervous every single time, so don't worry about it. So what, tell us a little about how you got into alternative culture or goth culture, when that kind of started and developed for you.
Yeah, let's see. I was, of course, reflecting back on that. There's, I guess you could say I probably was maybe about 11, 12 years old when I started getting my taste of the alternative culture, and it was through music. I have 2 older brothers, no sisters, so they're very much into just a lot of the music scene when it actually came down to either being into hip hop or rock or metal.
Right.
In my family, and my brothers primarily started gravitating towards listening to metal and punk rock and just more of the heavier stuff. So when I was a kid, I grew up in the mid to late 90s. So by the time I was starting to realize or become familiar with music and just the goth metal scene, it was maybe in the late 90s, so about 98, 99. So of course by that time it was the new metal scene that was popular. So by then, I started getting introduced to bands like Cold Chamber and Kitty, Soulfly, of course Manson. So I was very just intrigued by it, probably more so by the image and clothing and style, but of course just hearing it being blasted through the walls, I'm like, okay, this is fun, this sounds so fun. And it's so funny because I'm just this little girl, little child, so I'm pretty sure it was a little strange for my parents. But yeah, I started listening more and more to these bands, and of course at that time it was a lot of homemade VHS band videos that were coming out, or DVDs, things like that. So we were just kind of borrowing and just lending videos out to one another, trading videos out to cousins and friends, things like that. So one of the videos that we got was Spit in Your Eye, the Kitty video.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, them being all females, I was like, holy shit, I can do this too. I can dress like this. I can get into this. So I think that was my first taste in really seeing and hearing about it, and of course seeing women in it for sure, because I grew up on the reservation. I've been there my entire life. It's definitely not common for sure, to see, metalheads or punk rockers or goth kids, just things like that. You don't, it's not common. You don't see it. It's kind of a taboo type thing, one of those scary things, one of those, I guess, identities or forms of kind of being caught up into like devil worship, or being kind of witchy, things like that. So, of course, just hearing it, seeing it, and being comfortable with it, for sure, it made me feel very, just very happy, just very accepted in that way. And yeah, it was different. I don't know at that time if I knew that it was different, but I definitely started gravitating towards it. So I was about 11 or 12, and just music foremost, for sure, is what got me into the alt scene.
Very cool. Did you have any opportunity, or even now, do you have any opportunity for any type of local scene or club nights or concerts or anything like that?
So when I was younger, I didn't know too much about, of course, like much of the club scene, as far as I know now. Of course, they have a goth night and things like that, one of the local clubs. But prior to that, I knew nothing about it. Of course, I was a child, so I didn't have outlets to like go onto the internet at that time, or like find magazines, because I was just this kid, and I didn't have my parents didn't really want to purchase these items for me, or what have you, just because it was probably inappropriate at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but when I was a kid, I did, my first show was actually when I was 11, and I went to go see Soulfly, and from then on I went to shows with both of my brothers and some cousins. They're all guys, of course, so it was a little bit more hardcore, because of course they'd want to go into the pits, they'd want to go crowd surfing, they want to go do this and that. So they kind of take turns watching me on the side of the stage or side of the crowd. But I've been going to shows since then, when I was about 11, and I turned 26 this year, and shows have been going to concerts, seeing live bands has always been, another form of just happiness for me. I got really heavily into going to festivals as well, nice. Meeting bands, talking to bands, and it was always easier for me when I was a child, because it always seemed precious, I guess, sometimes to the band, seeing this child at shows. So eventually, I start talking to them or getting introduced to them by my older brothers. So, they eventually know who I was when they come back into town or whatever. But yes, shows primarily was the thing for me. And eventually, of course, when I became of age, when I turned 21, then I was finally able to go to like the goth club. And there used to be a venue here called Evolution here in Albuquerque, and it closed actually maybe about 4 years ago, but that's where they held goth night. And the first time I ever went was when I turned 22, and I can't remember the theme of it or the name of it, but that was my first goth night, and it was fucking beautiful.
Yeah.
I felt at home for sure, because I was always just going to going to shows, going to those types of venues, just concert venues, concert halls, things like that. But just the setup of everything, the sound, the lighting, the people, it just felt, I was like, okay, now this is different. This is different for me.
Yeah.
So it was a really good first time experience as far as like getting introduced and meeting new people. And it was another native goth chick that I knew at the time, and she's the one who's like, let's go, you're finally 21. Let's go check this out, you need to see it. Like, all right, cool. So that was the first time I had gone, and the last time I went was maybe a year ago. So they have it especially during the summers, they have it every Thursday night, I believe, at another club called FX.
Oh, nice.
And they have that every night, especially during the summer times, every Thursday night, during the summers. And of course, during the winter time, it kind of slows down a little bit, which is kind of odd. But I haven't been like a frequent goer, but when I have the chance, I do go, and it is a pretty solid scene though, here in Albuquerque.
That's very cool to hear. That's awesome. I'm always interested in hearing about that. And it's cool that hearing you describe your first experience at the club, because I think that's a moment that all goths kind of have this special place in their memory for that first moment, you know. But yeah, I should mention also that you're a model as well. And I was looking through what you have available publicly, and I was really impressed with how, you know, really high quality, high end photography. I wanted to ask, you know, I guess, how did you start modeling, and what was it about modeling that interested you?
So I probably started getting a little bit more into modeling when I was maybe about 18. I was just about to graduate high school, and, you know, I kind of needed something a little bit more creative to do. I was getting really sick of school, and I knew by the time I was graduating, I did not want to go to like university or anything like that. I needed something a little bit more me,
Right.
Something that I would enjoy and not grow tired of. So I ended up going to cosmetology school. And so now I've been a hairdresser now for 6.5 years. But through that, when I was in school, I started doing hair and makeup for local models and local fashion shows, photo shoots, things like that. And I just really enjoyed being in that type of setting, being surrounded by creative individuals. I started to notice that there wasn't a lot of Native American women in the community, in the fashion community here. A discouraging idea that kept popping up into my head at that time was that I am fucking short. I'm 4'11", so and it just not the image that's really what they're looking for, I guess, in the modeling community, as far as just, you know, those high fashion standards.
Right.
But eventually I just kind of like, fuck it, let's try it. Let's do something that I know that I'm gonna maybe enjoy. So I just kind of went out on a whim and just started getting contact with different photographers and models and kind of getting mentored. So my first shoot, you know, I finally had that. And funny enough, he was a Native American photographer too. So that
Very
helped
cool.
me a lot.
Yeah.
So it's like I felt like I lucked out. It was, you know, I look back on that shoot and it's not the greatest, but you know, it just took me back to where, like, how far I've come. I got more and more into hair, and then I was able to connect and do my own thing within the Native community, starting to connect with some of the designers, because there are a lot of Native American designers. So of course, they want to create creative teams that are fully Native American, you know, full, like when it comes to makeup artists, photographers, coordinators, things like that. So I started becoming a part of these teams to where I could do hair and makeup, and eventually the designers will ask me to model for them. So that was a huge thing for me, because I never thought that I would do any type of fashion modeling. I was just doing, just these fun creative shoots on my own, just very like either different characters.
Yeah.
Eventually I started connecting with more people within the Native fashion community. By then people were beginning to recognize my face. So that's when I was like, okay, I need to try to incorporate my gothy side with my culture.
What's your, I mean, you kind of touched on this. I guess, what's your view on sort of the representation within goth and alternative modeling, maybe versus more mainstream modeling, and if you see that as, where is it at, and do you think that's improving or getting worse?
I think now, well, I could only speak for what I have experienced within
Right.
the Native fashion community.
Sure. Okay.
So I feel from that point, it's a little bit more inclusive, meaning that, a lot of the models that Native designers now are working with are, tall, short,
Right.
have a full figure or a little bit skinny. It's more inclusive. A lot of times, the women have tattoos or just body mods, different hair colors, things like that. So seeing it within the Native community, I feel like that's a huge improvement. So that way, we can also just set this, not so much a standard, but I guess this image of acceptance.
Right.
But I'm also friends with a lot of women who are a part of, who are looking to become suicide girls. So Suicide Girls was one of my biggest influences when I first heard of them. And when I heard of Suicide Girls, this is probably in 2013, I would say. And I just absolutely fell in love with how these women are just, just what I eventually see myself as, person with body modifications, with colored hair, being like a different size, being different color, things like that. So from there, it's like, this is the shit I want to do. But, I was also kind of scared about it, because I come from a very cultural and traditional background. So it's kind of one of those things you don't really want to touch upon, or want to be publicized.
Right.
Because we, in our culture, we are, as women, held to a certain standard, and representing ourselves and our families and our culture and our tribe a certain way. So you don't really want to deface that image or that standard.
I was going to also mention it seems like you're fairly involved in activism in general. So I wanted to ask about that, and what kind of activism are you involved with, and is, being goth, does that have anything to do with your desire to protest or to do those kinds of things?
It's in my blood. It's in my blood. There's no ignoring that resistance. It runs deep, even if I want to accept it, even if I participate, things like that. I've come from a lineage that it shouldn't be here. Being part of that, I feel like just being and living is already just a big fuck you to colonization and into a world that I wasn't supposed to exist in. So within the past couple years, of course, more and more individuals, more and more youth have been rising up and voicing their concerns and just their wants of some type of change or just the fact of being heard. I don't think that being part of the it could be different for somebody else who's viewing me from the outside, but I don't think personally it has like being part of the goth culture or alt culture has much to do with just being involved in activism. But looking just having the image of this like punk rock kind of dark, just edgy image along with being rebellious, it's kind of a cool thing to picture. I think being involved has definitely involved in activism and the protesting and rallies, things like that. It's helped me become a little bit more comfortable in how I do portray myself. But it is a little bit difficult as far as getting more and more of my peers who are also in just the alt scene to want to participate in any type of activism. I don't know if it's just because being, kind of in their own personal thing of being like not wanting to get involved or being scared. I'm not sure why, but it is a little bit difficult for some reason. I don't know why, but I feel like it does also tie into just trying to set the record straight as to creating and reclaiming the proper image and culture of Native peoples.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think it's interesting in the goth community. I think it kind of also depends just because I think in Chicago there's a good number of goths who are immigrants or just generally vegans, just generally involved in activism. And I think maybe sometimes the complaint that I hear is people will say, goth doesn't have anything to say about politics, and so we shouldn't, it shouldn't be conflated with that. And my thing, I feel like if someone's understanding of what it is to be goth involves saying, I express myself the way that I want to and not the way that society expects me to, that's a inherently political statement, whether you want it to be or not. And I feel like acting in ways that being in the world in ways that diverge from the sort of expected norms and behaviors as a goth is political. And you even, if it kind of depends how you define political, but even if you want to say, like, and being involved in legislation or governmental bodies, there's the Sophie Foundation in England, which have actually helped to legislate like hate crime laws. But I think political can, and I've changed my mind on this, but I do think political can mean just, Trey, as you brought up, acting in public spaces in a way that's not normative. But I think, the reason I asked about the activism thing is because I think there's a lot more that we can do as the goth community. I think maybe you could say in the past we've helped support like the LGBTQ community, but I think we need to start asking questions like for festivals and events, what can we do in these spaces to better protect and respect the planet? For example, like I went to the metaphysical shop near me recently and bought some things. And when I went to check out, the guy took all of my stuff and he put each thing that I bought into its own little disposable plastic bag. And I was like, this, like, pagan communities specifically are like built around, protecting the earth, but we're using these disposable bags. I'm like, what are we doing? But Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I definitely understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So go ahead.
even just from how the term goth for me, when I was younger, again, just kind of going back to when I was first introduced to it, um, the word goth or gothic was one of those terms where, it took a while for me to actually accept, because in growing up on the reservation, again, we are one of 19 Pueblo reservations in New Mexico, and really the Pueblo is a reservation that was established by the Spanish back in the 1600s. And, a lot of that brought in the religious aspect of Catholicism and Christianity, and then also just the form of government. So, of course, that was kind of beaten into us and, scared us into just assimilating to these foreign ideas. So I feel like how I had mentioned that, if you were into certain type of music, and especially into like metal or anything that's dark and scary, you're automatically thought of as being a devil worshiper or a witch, things like that. So those terms really freaked me out as a child. Like, I'm like, oh fuck, I'm gonna get in trouble, or there's gonna be some type of backlash. So that, even just that term gothic was like, what am I doing? Like, what am I really doing? But eventually I was like, really? Like, okay, it took me a while to actually learn and figure out this is kind of who I want to identify myself as well. Yeah.
Do you feel like that Catholicism helped to, I guess, enable imperialism or colonialism in some ways?
Definitely.
Yeah.
That's one of those huge, I think that's probably one of the biggest ideas that changed a lot within our tribes. It created a lot of division, and then of course it wiped out a lot of our religious or traditional and cultural background.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things about my tribe that I do not know, simply because it was stamped out, it was erased, and so it changed a lot. And I'm pretty sure a lot of those ideas of people being scared or being afraid of how me and my brothers were dressing and what we're listening to, I'm pretty sure those fears were coming from the church.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about, well, Trey, did you have anything you wanted to throw in there before we talk about fashion and appropriation?
Well, I guess the only thing just related to what you were last saying, I'm curious if you've seen any change in the community as far as the, I guess, predominance of Christianity and colonial beliefs versus native traditions, or has there been, as in some communities, a reawakening of, tradition and the past?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I for one participate in a lot of ceremonies, cultural ceremonies, dances, and I come from a family that's where it's very, very strong. I come from a family that also speaks our language fluently, so of course language is the connection to everything in our culture. So also just living on the reservation, growing up with being surrounded by it, it's all around you, it's in the ground, it's in the sounds, it's in even just the homes that you're living in, things like that. when you're cruising. And then also a lot of youth, of course, are still growing up and still living there, still thriving, all that. And there are a lot of programs and projects and even school, education that is working to preserve a lot of our cultural ways and languages, things like that. So it's getting reclaimed, definitely getting reclaimed day
Very
by
cool.
day, for sure. Yep.
Great. That's great to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, I did want to talk about fashion a little bit, and part of the reason this came up is because I have been seeing comments in different groups and things about what qualifies as cultural appropriation, both into goth and out of goth. And this issue, this specific video has come up in the past, but we haven't ever actually really addressed it. And if for anyone who doesn't know, there's this YouTuber called Social Repose who I would never call him a goth, but he calls himself a goth and has made videos about that and that kind of thing. He's someone, he wears a native headdress basically, and he has made a couple videos discussing why he thinks this is okay. And so I want to get your general thoughts on this first. I pulled out a couple of his primary arguments about this, and I want to talk about those. But I guess what are your general thoughts on sort of the use of native attire by non-natives?
Well, so I did see the video of what's his name, Social Repose.
Yeah, I don't know that's what he goes by on YouTube. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I watched it, and it's the first time I ever heard of him. So, it wasn't so much shocking. It's just, another eye roll.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Just another eye roll. And, of course, once it comes to native cultural appropriation, I feel like it always comes down to, the headdress, the war bonnet, the feathers, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And already with that, it's already just avoiding and disregarding the amount of Native peoples and how diverse Native peoples are, and with images of the headdress, things like that, being misused and worn and mocked. It's very discouraging. It's discouraging. It really is. And like I first mentioned, it is like a huge eye roll.
Yeah.
Because not all tribes, of course, not all of us use these particular objects or clothing, things like that. And it's only for certain tribes, only for certain social people, for certain men, things like that. So it's already kind of disregarding a lot of the other tribes and just how diverse the cultures are.
Yeah. Let me just jump to his last one of his last points in the video, because this is something that I wanted to bring up, which is and expand, and talk about, which is what you just mentioned about the diversity and complexity within, between tribes. And because he makes this one of his arguments is that he says his ancestors came to the U.S. from France after all that other stuff happened, and part of the threads in this video is him talking about wanting to have a nuanced conversation about white people and how we're all individuals and we don't all come from the same place and so on. But the problem is this is exactly the type of privilege that enables bigotry, because white people get that benefit of the doubt. They get that nuance by default, and people of color don't. White people see ourselves as complex and from multiple backgrounds and environments, but then label the cultural other as this homogenous and internally coherent group. Like,
Right.
the black people, brown people, they're all seen as having the same values, the same heritage, the same beliefs. And, white people never get asked, where are you from? No, but really, where are you from? Because so people of color have to spend extra energy just fighting to try and get to the starting point that white people are already at. And so that was just really infuriating to me to lump a whole group of people together, but then try and talk about the diversity of white people.
Yeah. Yes. And, it brings up very many, ongoing issues that are still, that reign heavy in our communities. And, him saying just after all that other stuff happened, that's just, that is bothersome. And him not realizing that, kind of going back to his thoughts of him wearing a war bonnet, those, they are, of course, highly sacred pieces and objects. Native peoples, native tribes weren't allowed to freely perform or have ceremonies or dances, things like that, until the American Indian Religious Freedom Act was passed, and that was only in 1978. So we've been fighting this entire time, and it's only been, since my oldest brother was born just then. And I was like, holy shit, like, just only these few 40 years, that's how long we've only been able to freely and openly and comfortably be who we are as a people. There are still very many ceremonies, things like that are not publicly seen, but definitely still being practiced. And when it comes to certain objects or clothing, things like that, we are given certain articles of clothing, certain pieces of jewelry, things to represent ourselves as we move through our stages of life. As for example, with the war bonnet, only certain, like I mentioned, only certain men can wear those. Each feather that is put onto the war bonnet typically signifies a certain, maybe a certain act that you did, as far as like being in battle or providing or hitting puberty, things like that. You go through certain stages of life, and you are given these pieces to represent that certain point. So it never does not just not have a meaning to it. So it is highly it is highly disrespectful. And also seeing the fact that him disregarding that as if our issues kind of just stopped. It brings up the, it took me to one of the more common, it's now, finally reaching some even media headlines of murdered and missing Indigenous women. It's been happening for centuries and centuries, and now we're able to find the outlets to bring these topics up that, we're going missing. We're being found on the side of the road, or being found in just in unfortunate circumstances. And, of course, 4 out of 5 Native women are affected by violence. And it's something that is seen on the daily, for certain individuals. Some of us are a little bit more, able to finally kind of get ourselves out of that situation, but we're still surrounded by it. And also that, the Native women face murder rates 10 times the national average. So these things have not stopped.
Yeah.
These issues have not stopped. We're still fighting every single day to find our loved ones. People, we're still fighting things that were supposed to kill us off, like alcoholism, drug abuse, even gambling, things like that. These particular issues were brought into our communities for a specific reason, and that is to kill us off. So when you see someone, using a certain object, wearing a certain piece of clothing in a disrespectful way, and hearing it being kind of like, oh, I'm not doing anything wrong, it's just kind of widening the availability of us being mocked and getting those stereotypes. Like it's still okay. It's still okay. Yeah, or it's fine. We don't have an issue with it.
Yeah, I think the Native community has the highest rate for police brutality instances as well.
Yes.
I think the most recent statistic I heard was that 3 in 4 women are sexually assaulted or raped.
Yes.
And when it, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think when it happens by non-Native people, this still happens, that the tribes aren't allowed to prosecute them, and most of the time the U.S. government just doesn't do anything about it, so that these white people are just able to get away with it.
Correct. And a lot of them are, especially if they are done on sovereign land, on tribal land. Yeah. And I had this conversation too yesterday, actually, with another one of my peers, and her and I were talking about the issue of murdered and missing Indigenous women. And unfortunately, about 2 weeks ago, there was a young girl. She was 5. She was 5 years old. She came from one of the northern pueblos as well, and she was kidnapped. And they found her, I believe, 4 days later, and they found her body and on the reservation. So I'm not too, it's still very unclear as to how far the investigation is going, and what the tribe is allowing, because I also think it's the tribe's responsibility, of course, for sure, number one, to allow this to be figured out as well. So it's one of those situations where certain pueblos, certain tribes, they kind of want to keep things hush hush. They don't want to bring that attention. We don't want to bring that type of media into our areas. It's very confusing, but it's still an ongoing battle.
Yeah.
And of course, and another thing is even just our land, things like land. So there are very many different issues that are still being fought for. And once I again, kind of going back to the YouTube video of I forgot his name already.
Social Repose. Yeah.
Yes. It's
it doesn't matter, to be honest. It's not important.
Yes. It's very just like, God damn it. There's people out there who would think like this. It's so it's so fair. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, because you're right. He says something to the effect that he shouldn't have to worry about being held accountable for crimes of white people in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we did to Native people, and I don't need to tell you this, but for the listener who might not know, is we took kids, we literally stole children from their parents, put them into the school system, and tried to beat their heritage out of them. I think the phrase was save the man and kill the Indian, because the implication was that they weren't people. And these kids were subjected to chlorine scrubs and brainwashing and abuse. And that's not something, like you said, like this was not 2,000 years ago, right? This is recent, and it's not something that just goes away. This stays through generations, and people are still suffering because of it. And the way that he's talking about this is just kind of shows that as a white man, like, I don't have to deal with fear and distrust of the school system because the system is built to work for me.
Mm-hmm.
And
like, just kind of going into, like, okay, sure, you still come from a descendant that possibly may have been probably an asshole to people of color. And of course, I'm not going to hold you personally accountable, but you also have, a thing called privilege that it's just odd. It's going to be easier for you.
Yeah. And I think trying to minimize and diminish what's happening now by saying it happened in the past is like actively marginalizing and harming people of color too. Like, it's not, it's a aggressive kind of act. So then the other thing about fashion specifically is his primary argument for being able to wear it is, he says that the war bonnet is modified so it doesn't count as a sacred object.
It took me to this area for myself where I know there are certain even as a traditional person, that I know specifically that I'm not supposed to touch. I'm not going to touch. And just for this simple fact of respect, it's in simplest terms, respect. And obviously, it is what he was wearing. It was all black. It still had, just kind of a little bit of tribal designs on it, things like that. But it's still clearly depicting a war bonnet, a headdress. And I'm pretty sure we all know, where that idea, where that image comes from. So we are going to automatically, it's a Native American headdress. So I don't think that the idea of it being even modified or being used in like it's costume,
Right.
And it's still very, it's comes just simplest terms, just very, very disrespectful, just very ignorant as well.
Yeah.
I mean, he kind of goes into some of the comments that he was receiving from people who were obviously just kind of offended or against what he was saying. And even with that, he took it as a joke. So clearly does not want to educate himself and just the possibility of understanding what it could be used for, why it's used the way it is and worn the way it is. And, just, okay, maybe I should probably retire this. Yeah. Just no second thoughts.
Part of the thing about cultural appropriation is, and I think he even mentions that he's like, well, cultural appropriation just means, I think he reads a Wikipedia definition or something, but he says it's just taking, using fashion or items from another culture. And so he says, well, everybody does that. But I think there's an important distinction. That's a really weak definition of cultural appropriation. I think there's a few other aspects of that. One of them is this a power dynamic where you have members of a dominant culture taking elements from a culture of people who have been systematically oppressed by that dominant group to use it for their own gratification without any kind of regard of where that practice came from. So I think a really good example of this is the promulgation of Elvis Presley being the king of rock, the inventor of rock and roll. And that kind of completely just erased Black history. And that's another example where this is that, that was however many years ago, but that cultural belief is still actively oppressing Black people, because there's still this belief that white people invented rock and roll, and they still get more celebrated for rock music than Black people do. So these things don't just like go away,
Yes. It just entirely disregards the idea that we even, we as a people, as people of color, even exist. It's like, okay, this is where my idea comes from. And it's kind of funny. It brings up this little comment that I read. I don't remember what the entire conversation was or what the post was. It was a post I saw on Facebook, but it's like everything is considered res until a white person gets a hold of it, then it's considered a life hack. So even just something like it's kind of yeah. Yes.
Yeah, that's so fucked up.
I mean, yeah. So it's just, things like that. But having that ability, just having that ability to take and claim it as your own it's just, I do not understand it.
Yeah, is that imperialism, that we have a right to take and use whatever we want. Yeah, and the only other thing I wanted to say about that was just to kind of bring it back to goth fashion, because goth fashion does use ephemera from other periods of time and kind of modifies it and recontextualizes those items. But so there's this other term, and this is more of an academic term, but it's bricolage, and basically the definition of that is the process of taking and recontextualizing items and fashion from hegemony. So it's different from cultural appropriation because it's taking from oppressive power structures to create new styles, which it's basically like punching up instead of punching down, So I think we have to be, and I'm not saying goth is completely innocent in any of their uses of style at all in any way, but I'm saying we need to be conscious of what we're doing and where we're using it, how we're using it, where it's coming from, because there are, we have incorporated like some Afro-Caribbean styles and things like that, and it's like, what are we recontextualizing these things as? Is it reinforcing this imperialist kind of idea,
Right. And I think, it was kind of I don't know if I actually really planned it through in my head when I started kind of incorporating the two elements of just like the goth, just dark goth culture with the native side. I think my thing was, I feel like, of course, anything dark and macabre and, just evil and bad, it comes up in all of our cultures, regardless of where you come from, your own personal belief. It's there. It's scary. It's there to even, possibly like set you back onto maybe either a right path or a darker path. Just however one sees it. But, in my culture, there is most definitely that scary side in our culture and traditions and our native religion, there is most definitely that scary side that you have to be aware of. Like, you still have to respect it for sure, because it's something that, it's, I remember as a child, like if I was being bad, wasn't listening, not doing something I wasn't supposed to do, and as a form of like being scared into stopping whatever it was, like a certain medicine man or a certain figure is going to come for you, and it was horrifying to me.
Right.
But at the same time, now that I think about it, I'm like, this is, we respect it. You still respect it. You still offer your prayers. You still offer, just you don't ignore it. You don't ignore it. But I think that's more so I being fascinated by as well. I mean, for sure, it's something that I know I'm not gonna, I wouldn't willfully subject myself to. I'm good. I don't want to dabble into any of that, but being able to still incorporate something that's spooky, something that is shocking, into just my normal everyday look and view of myself, I find my own power through that as well, as an individual and as also a different type of native Pueblo woman as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's definitely different from my mother, my grandmothers, my aunts. I grew up with a lot of women in the family, and it is a matrilineal society. Unfortunately, once government came in, it turned into the more patriarchy. But once it comes down to traditional values and teachings, it is the woman who will be the leader and the one who teaches. So it is, I take it in differently and I offer it differently, but being able to still represent myself in this, as a goth girl, as a punk rock girl, as a metalhead, I feel like everyone's a little bit more comfortable with it as far as my family. I think now that they realize, okay, she's really not into all the dark stuff, she's okay. Yeah, she's not really a devil worshiper, whatever.
Yeah, it's interesting to see, because I think everybody who's in the goth community or the alternative community does this in some way, where they take either like some external philosophy, whether sometimes common ones are like nihilism or absurdism or whatever. But then you have, you see communities forming around something like Cholo Goth or, these different interplays between outside influences and bringing those into their individual identity as a goth and incorporating those. And it's really interesting to see how those play out and how that changes in people individually and the community at large. And I think that's really, really cool.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think it was another way for me to also reclaim the fact that, I can still wear, my black moccasins with like my fishnets or something like that, or black lipstick and like dark eyeshadow with, a traditional dress. It helped me reclaim my being comfortable in my traditional attire. Because before, when I was younger, I would typically only wear maybe some of my turquoise jewelry or, my moccasins, things like that, when I was taking part in ceremonies or in dances. But I'm like, this is I can't just do it during these times. This is who I am as a person. This is how I was brought into this universe. This is how I was chosen to be. So what better way to, just kind of reintroduce myself back into it. than by mixing the two. And I absolutely I love mixing the two cultures together to create my own image. And yeah, like I mentioned before, it was nothing that was really like thought out. I didn't really think about it, but it's getting recognized, and to the point where even on social media, I started like on my Instagram page and some of my Facebook posts, things like that, I will hashtag the term indigigoth, the indigenous goth.
Awesome. Yeah, that's awesome.
And that's something that I was like, I'm going to use this for myself. So people are starting to identify me with that term, and I'm like, hell yes, this, and other girls are starting to use it, and it's just so fucking inspiring and very encouraging to know that just my mending of the two, and the fact that you can, without being even disrespectful to our own culture, it still can be shown. And I through the years, kind of getting more into the alt culture, things like that. Of course, when it comes to goth subculture, I would get into like different authors, of course, like Mary Shelley, Nathaniel Hawthorne, things like that. I found a lot of my inspirations through literature, and then people like, let's see, like Betty Page. She's another one. She wasn't, of course, goth, but she still had that alt side to her, to becoming who she was, and portraying herself in a certain way that she was reclaiming herself as a sexual being. Yeah. So being able to connect all these elements together helps me remember who I am, even just as a female, as a woman. So it's very fun. It gets kind of scary sometimes, because again, I don't want to disrespect even my own culture. So there are times where I will ask, my family, like, is this cool? Like, am I gonna be okay? And they're like, yeah, it's fine, because I myself don't want to put myself in a situation where I'm gonna get a lot of backlash for it, because it could happen.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm about ready to wrap up in a little bit. Trey, do you have any comments or questions or anything to add to any of that?
The only curiosity I have, at least at this point, is, as you mentioned, the indigigoth aspect that you're kind of promoting and getting into. What in your mind do you do? How do you combine the two cultures, either in your aesthetic or in your actions or in the type of things you're interested in? What kind of do you do that would be those touchstones that merge it, that might allow someone else who's interested in, oh, that sounds interesting, I'd like to see that, to give somebody else an idea as how, someone else who might be an indigenous person and doesn't know how to interrelate their own culture with this subculture that they're intrigued by?
Primarily through fashion, through my clothing, my choice of clothing. That's how I kind of just identify what indigigoth would look like. Of course, everybody else has their own particular style fused into it, but I used it more so, the term indigigoth, more so to how I was dressing. Like I had mentioned, I will on occasion will rock like, my mocs with fishnets and like a, skirt or dress, or, just dark lipstick, dark makeup, dark everything with turquoise jewelry. Or at times I will also do photo shoots where I will do like a traditional clothing and still have a different type of hairstyle that would still, more so like very romantic goth looking, things like that. It's more how I dress and present that image with myself. But more and more, I start to identify it more with my own personal upbringing in our culture, in our traditional culture. Some of it I can share, some of it I can't. But even just with clanships are how we identify ourselves as a group of people.
Okay.
So as in my introduction, when I introduced myself in my native tongue, that I was introducing my traditional names and the clans that I was raised in, and my clan is corn. And it's funny because I'll joke with my brothers and my mom. I was like, yeah, we're the children of the corn. So just things like that, just little jokes. And also we have our homes in the reservations. They're kivas, and they're kivas where we have some of our ceremonies, but each kiva has its own household name to it. So I belong to what would be the pumpkin kiva. So I'm like, yeah, it's pumpkin season. It's like Halloween season. So things like that, I'll kind of make those types of jokes, or discuss it with other people, or put that kind of pun or spin on it when I'm posting things on social media. So people kind of, of course, Pueblo people get it a little bit more, but yes, it ties in those ways as well. But Indigigoth is just, the merging of the indigenous dress and style with the goth look and goth aesthetic. So I definitely identify it more with the look and the fashion, and like that.
Okay. Yeah.
With that, I also go into I also hashtag the term the Res Betty, because I'm obsessed with, I fucking admire Betty Page. And being from the reservation, res is kind of like the slang term for that. So the Res Betty is just one of those also names that I gave myself that people are now identifying me with.
Okay.
So I guess we'll do we'll close out the show after this, but the last sort of question I wanted to ask was to kind of get you to take the temperature from your experience within goth and metal and these different alternative communities. Has it been an experience where you have been welcomed and accepted, or do you feel like there are some issues with bigotry or racism or other problems that need to be addressed?
When it comes to the goth community here in Albuquerque, I'm not, I don't really know too much, of course, outside of this particular city.
Sure, yeah.
But with the Albuquerque scene, everyone has been so just very, very fucking awesome with me. There are only a handful that I have, grown close with, have worked with, but from knowing them after even just maybe a couple years, they've always been very open with me, especially being a baby goth, I guess you could say. Growing up in, being born in the 90s, growing up in the late 90s, things like that. A lot of them were chilling in the 80s, things like that. So they're very accepting, of course. I get kind of teased a little bit, sometimes not knowing too far back into different, variations of music, especially, or, different experiences back in the day. But so far, everyone's just been super cool, just super sweet, very, very informative, for sure. And then within the Native community as well, everyone's still kind of shy about it, still kind of quiet. But when others come to me, some of the younger, preteen goths, things like that, it's very heartwarming, I guess you could say. It's very sweet. And sometimes the metalhead community, of course, their metalheads can be a little bit more stubborn, but it's okay.
Why don't you let us know? So I guess 2 questions to close out. Tell us where we can find you online for your social media and any projects you have. And then if you had any recommendations for reading or things to watch or anything like that for any listeners who want to learn more about Indigenous culture and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So on socials, you can find me on Instagram. My Instagram name is Daphne Marie 1313. So, or you can just find me at Daphne Coriz. And I do primarily use Instagram for a lot of that. And then I'm also on Facebook, Daphne Coriz, but that's more so for just little things, nothing crazy, but all of my Instagram stuff, that's my go-to for sure. And then as far as reading material, it's more so reading material that I would recommend. And one of my biggest ones is a book by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, and her book is An Indigenous People's History of the United States. That, of course, gives the history of Native peoples through Indigenous person view and experiences, and then also Education for Extinction and American Indian and boarding school experience. So that one's a really good one too, just because that has a huge impact on how we came to be in our reservations. But those are the 2 good ones that I definitely would recommend for any background, any history of how we're still here.
Very cool. There was some weird feedback there, but I did get that. I don't know what was Skype's doing something funky.
Oh,
but
okay. Sorry.
No, that's okay. It's not your fault. I don't know what that was, but I got that, and I will put those in the show notes. Link that for anyone who wants to check it out, and then also my own personal recommendation, because I was doing my own research and things like that. I really like Giassi Ross, who has written a couple books that are more poetry, and he's got some great stuff on YouTube, and he does some like spoken word things as well. But his 2 books are How to Say I Love You in Indian and
oh, right, yes.
I forget the other one, but I like him a lot, so that'll be my own recommendation to throw in there for anyone who wants to do some extra reading. But yeah, so Daphne, this has been a fantastic episode. I'm so glad we had you on. This was I really, really enjoyed speaking with you, and it really, really was a pleasure to get to hang out. So thank you so much for taking the time to do this with us.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, nice. Thank you. I enjoyed that. It was a challenging conversation for sure, but it's always nice to get these points across. It's very hard for a lot of people to want to sit down to listen and actually confront these types of topics.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I noticed just in the how many ever years of looking at like panels and TED Talks and things like that, where they're addressing the experiences of people of color in America. I almost never see Native people represented in those conversations, almost never. So I thought this was really important to do this kind of an episode as like a standalone thing for the podcast. So I really appreciate you being able to come on and hang out.
Yes, thank you.
Daphne, thank you again so much for coming on. In 2 weeks, we're going to be back with a brand new episode on the 2nd of the month. We're going to be having Bianca on, a Chicago native and artist. And we're going to be chatting about an article published in Obscura Undead talking about hipster goth. So I hope you'll come back for that. Thank you again for spending some time with us. And until next time, stay dark.
The preceding program is a member of The Belfry, a network of blogs, podcasts, and videos for the darkly inclined. Go to thebelfry.rip for more information.
Yeah, listening to I actually listened to the very last one that was posted about the concept of death and
death.
death. But I was also thinking about in our culture too, and there was a point or comment that was made about how certain headstones or grave sites, things like that, is kind of can be a little problematic as far as like having those followers,
right,
or
yeah.
This area. And I didn't really never thought about it that way, because when we have burials and things at home, it's all unmarked. It's all we don't know where people are. Well, not so much where people are, but yeah, it's
right.
It's just that inclusion, no like separation or anything like that. So that was dope.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed that.
Cool. Very cool. Thank you. That's great to hear. Awesome.